lunatics, geeks, and all-around freaks. My name is Taryn, or Moon, and this is my Crash Course History project.
Okay.
So let's establish a few things. I am not John Green, or at least I hope I'm not, because that would be really weird. So why am I doing a Crash Course project? School. We love it. And that's not all sarcasm on my part, because I get to talk about my favorite thing. Crows. No, history. More specifically, the Victorian Era, which I am totally not obsessed with. Not at all. There's no indication that I am obsessed with the Victorian Era. Yeah, let's ignore that and get into it. I want you to close your eyes for just a few seconds. When you hear the word ghost, what image comes to your mind? Now conjure that image, hold it, and open your eyes. Perhaps you saw a child in a white sheet on Halloween begging for candy, or some kind of pop culture reference like, I was gonna say Pennywise, but Pennywise isn't a ghost. Is Pennywise a ghost? Pennywise is like a creature. Is that like an alien? Okay, whatever. Or like the Scream. That Scream isn't a ghost either. That's a murderer. Ghostbusters. The girl from The Ring. Exorcist? None of these are ghosts. Or maybe you saw a ghostly figure in old clothing. A woman dressed in white with lace and frills and a long, long trail. Or a man in a top hat and a really weird mustache that makes him look like H.H. Holmes, which is something that we'll get to. We'll get to that later. We'll just move on for now. Those are Victorian ghosts. In fact, much of our haunting culture is centered around the era. If you don't believe me yet, feel free to close your eyes again and imagine a haunted house, whether it's your own imagination or from a movie. There's a chance you saw a cabin in the woods type house, or you could have seen something like any of these images. While the first few of those images showed up when I Google searched haunted house, those last three simply showed up when I searched Victorian home. It's not that we associate the Victorian era with ghosts. In fact, maybe you'll better sort it with Sherlock Holmes, Industrial Revolution, and fancy British people with teacups in their hands. No, it's that we associate ghosts with the era unintentionally. But why? Well, my friends, that is what I'm going to tell you today. From creepy old houses and inventions that cause people to hallucinate, to everyone gathering around a deathbed during the religious rebranding and the rise of spiritualism. To start off, we need to put ourselves into the Victorian era, lasting from 1837 to 1901, or arguably 1910 if you want to include the Edwardian period. The era was defined by Queen Victoria's reign. However, American Victorianism isn't considered to start until after the Civil War, which is roughly 30 years after the parent country, and I say parent country because Britain is like the parent country, even though the Americans are like rebellious teenagers and they said, F you, I'm gonna go and do my own thing. Anyways, okay. This particular era in terms of American history is named by the Gilded Age, which is basically from the Civil War to like 1896, and the Progressive Era, which is 1890s to 1920s. But we're using Victorian because not only do I mean those two together, but also it kind of relates to Britain in some ways. Anyways, after finally recovering from the major after effects of the Civil War, many Americans wouldn't have believed Bill Wurtson saying that
technology is about to go crazy.
Dude, I love Bill Wurtson so much. The Industrial Revolution had just happened and everyone was shooketh. Science was the new Christianity, and oh boy, it was like magic. As my new favorite historian, Professor Roger Luckhurst, says in his article about the Victorian supernatural, every scientific and technological advance encouraged a kind of magical thinking and was accompanied by a shadow discourse of the occult. For every disenchantment, there was an active re-enchantment of the world. Because the advances in science were so rapid, the natural and supernatural often became blurred in popular thinking. Locomotives, telegraphs, photography, a thing that can write a letter with the push of a button, you know, like typewriters, modern computer. Quite a few of these inventions caused widespread communication as well as an access to shared culture between different societies. Take, for example, the perfection of the rotary printing press in 1843 by Richard March Hoe. Get it? Richard March Hoe. I'm so funny. Which allowed books and newspapers to be printed at a much faster speed than ever before. With said printers, works such as Emanuel Swedenborg's writings on the spiritual world could be reprinted and mass distributed. These writings, originally from the century before, are said to be a common cause of the rise of spiritualism. In 1848, newspapers across America printed a single story of two teenage sisters from New York. Margaret and Kate Fox claimed that they had communicated with a man previously murdered within their home through a telegraph. They went on to become the most popular mediums who communicate through taps, and while the two later admitted that this was fake news, their story created a large epidemic of spiritual beliefs. Many people also attempted to communicate with the dead through a means of technology and rituals surrounding the energy of both the living and the dead. But why was there a desire to communicate with the dead in the first place? Well, there had been so much blood and death in the Civil War, and families across America couldn't help but grieve their loved ones. And death rates continued to rise without an ongoing war due to rise in disease, accidents, and unhealthy living conditions. According to Carol Christ, an expert on Victorian death, the average lifespan for middle to upper-class males was 44 years, 25 for tradesmen, and 22 for laborers. 57 of every 100 children in working families were dead by 5 years of age. And with the rise of industrial produce, there was less time and money put into keeping populations healthy. People of the Victorian era became obsessed with the death of loved ones. Instead of trying to make the person better, they would wait around their deathbed because they saw some kind of importance in the last words of someone's life. And once they passed, loved ones would create death masks and jewelry out of the person's hair. And by the way, I had no idea what death masks were until I looked it up. They're creepy. Why? Why? The art of mourning became incredibly important, and this was partially due to Queen Victoria's immense mourning of her husband in 1861 all the way up to her death in 1901. Yes, Queen Victoria was so in love with her husband that she mourned his death for 40 years. 40 years, like over half of her life. That's commitment. That's love. The standard for citizens was different, however, in that they would primarily wear black clothing to project their grief onto onlookers for only 2.5 years after a close relative's death. Nonetheless, since mortality rates continued to rise, people would basically be dressed in, their mourning outfits for their entire lives. Through this perpetual state of mourning, many felt the need to communicate with the deceased, not only to find satisfaction with their life, but also to find out what the afterlife was like. See, during the Christian Enlightenment of the 18th century, many people became skeptical of the ways of their religion. This caused a rise of evangelism. Where religion was previously society and church-based, it was now centered around each individual's personal connection to the Bible, and often practiced at home instead of in the public. Would you stop shaking the camera? That is not... Stop it. Stop it. This change in culture suggested more discrepancies with the old, more Catholic ways of Christianity. And the doubt caused many to question whether or not there was a heaven and hell, if spirits found peace or if they were forever doomed to watch their loved ones from afar. Mesmerism, electrobiology, clairvoyance, thought-reading, crystal gazing, and spiritualism in general all played a key part in culture at the time. This spiritualism movement, or the act of communicating with ghosts, was popular among all classes, including even Queen Victoria early on. Women were often perceived as mediums better because of their divine spiritual perfectibility. This would later contribute into the rise of feminism. As the Victorian Web's article on spiritualism says, spiritualism became a part of Victorian subculture with its mediums, specialist newspapers, pamphlets, treatises, societies, private and public seances, which included table rapping, table tipping, Ouija boards, automatic writing, levitation, and other communication with spirits. People like W.T. Steed were fascinated with both the spiritual world and the scientific investigation. Steed traveled on the Titanic, and many mediums claimed for him to be the first spirit to report when the Titanic went down. There were also many skeptics against the movement, such as Charles Dickens. He credited himself as an excellent mesmerizer, but only because it was more scientific in claim. He went on to write A Christmas Carol, which he completely disregarded as possible and just wrote as fiction, and definitely got a lot of money out of that. I mean, that's basically the base of a lot of our ghost stories. I'm going on a tangent. But many other writers found themselves creating stories based upon the paranormal and supernatural, especially women writers who had access to such a platform now that people believe they were closer connected to spirituality, which is kind of stupid, but that's okay. That's what life is. It's fine. You win some, you lose some. It's fine. These works of fiction are what have lasted throughout time, allowing us modern people to look into the fascination of the past. Ghosts being a part of pop culture made a huge imprint on history, especially upon the view of religion. From these Victorian fascinations came horror books and films, as well as the rise in occult and Satanism. Okay, now that we've gone over the causes, let's take a closer look at how current paranormal and supernatural trends relate to the Victorian era. As evangelism rose, so did the importance of home life, where a house in the past was simply where the family slept and stayed before going out into society. It was now an essential part of society. Much of one's class depended on the interior decoration, design, and style of their home. Thus, the Gothic Revolution came about. Gingerbread trims, lace-like appearances, and asymmetrical patterns were on the rise. Smith Brothers architecture analysis states that early architecture in the United States was based mostly upon popular Georgian styles from England. As the country expanded, the neoclassical homes started using columns and pediments drawn from ancient Greece. American Victorian homes borrowed architectural elements from the Gothic Roman churches and the Northern European castles. Homes were like plants, meant to be trimmed, maintained, and kept beautiful. However, as the First World War commenced, the upkeep of these houses deteriorated, leaving the wood to rot, the colors to dull. People began to view the Victorian houses as unkempt, unsanitary, gloomy, and dark during the 20th century. The architecture itself gained a reputation because it is based on historical styles of Gothic, Roman, and Greek all mixed together. This mix made it seem as though the homes were in a disheveled state and somehow haunted. Soldiers coming back from the war now saw their homes as a symbol of death. The asymmetry was now eerie instead of an art form. Slick, clean, equilateral houses took over instead. But we're getting way out of the Victorian era, so let's jump back into the past. If you want to hear more, feel free to check out Vox's video, The Victorian Home Horrors. Do you want to get down? Rue just smacked my water with her tail. Go, you've done enough. What's your damage, Rue? The house itself was complex. The wealthy wanted to show off their opulence and force the lower classes away at the same time. The upkeep of the house was set to the servants that were from those lower class families, and they were held to the standard of being seen but not heard. More on that later. Servant halls and secret passages were created for staff to sneak in and out of rooms without interrupting the company, which caused some owners to have a sense of unease, as though someone were there watching them through the walls. Creaks would come out of nowhere as they passed by. Sometimes you would see a figure quickly pass in the corner of your eye. This eerie setup may have been the inspiration for the serial killer H.H. Holmes' Death Castle, but that's a video for another day entirely. Hint, he was crazy. He was a genius. Yikes. So maybe people were actually seeing servants roaming, but they also could have been hallucinating. People on the rich side had access to drugs that could cause them, but there was an unintentional one. Gas lamps. Many people were tired of having to light candles every few hours, and they were tired of accidentally blowing them out. So gas lamps were created. Many upper-class families installed such an invention in their homes. Unknown to them, many of the compounds held carbon monoxide, poison, and also something that may or may not have caused hallucinations. Don't do drugs, kids. Other inventions contributed to the belief of ghosts. In addition to arsenic, lead, and carbon monoxide inventions that made people crazy, there was also photography. And that was crazy expensive, but also really popular at the time. Like this set of photos. I am just as confused as you. I looked up the translation of the text, and it literally means hysterical yawning. Why? And it's not like they took 3 photos, like, really quick of this woman yawning. No. Cameras took forever to operate. The subject would have to stand in front of the camera for 5 minutes because the exposure was so long. If someone moves, it would mess up the entire picture. Basically, this lady posed like this for 5 minutes each. Why? Why? But hoy, did that give some people ideas. The discovery of what moving in a photo did after development gave a lot of people really good ideas that may have just been scams because money and popularity. Like, Spirit photography. Most of the time it was fake. They could have someone simply walk in the background and make it seem transparent. For example, here's a picture of Ghost Me. This took no Photoshop. We just set the exposure to like 2.5 seconds and then it just worked. Other times they would paint faces on or layer photos with is that Abraham Lincoln? Wait a sec. Hold on, 1 second. Dude, yes it is! This guy not only faked a portrait of Abraham's wife with Ghost Abe, but also took a photo of himself with a fake Ghost Abe as well. Yeesh. When your parents ask you what you learned in school today, tell them that Photoshop was invented longer than they might think, okay? Cause, yeah, spirit photography is hard to prove, but what isn't hard to prove is the fact that death photography existed. As I said earlier, photos were very expensive, and people never knew when the right time to take a family portrait was. So they waited for someone to die. To quote History.com's Victorian Art of Dying, photographs of dead relatives became an increasingly popular feature of family albums, often in a lifelike pose with rosy coloring and even open eyes painted over their eyelids. And this, my friends, is when the children come in. The epitome of innocence. Many children died at a young age, sending grief into an entire family. The innocence of a said child was preserved in a way that some people are scared when they realize that winter is coming. Since not many have made it past 5, families did all they could to capture that innocence, whether it's taking pictures of them as corpses or not. Children in general were, like servants, supposed to be seen and not heard. They represented some kind of posh formality that forbade them from speaking or having fun. This was where the trend of corrupted innocence became a horror. Is this normal family portrait not as creepy as hell? Dolls, music boxes, all forms of toys in the Victorian era have since been turned into horror icons. And what makes it worse is that, the decoration of the houses, the decorations of the dress, especially the white dress of innocence, is a sign of eeriness. The white dress also contributed to stories like Woman in White or La Llorona. While not necessarily Victorian in origin, these icons are often seen wearing very frilly white gowns, lace and all. They walk around, silent and still, being told to be just a pretty little vengeful thing. My favorite. So that just about covers it. There's a lot more I could have put into this video, but obviously it's already long enough, and right now my recording is at 56 minutes, so I'd rather cut it off here. Overall, the Victorian era is a goddamn source of so many horror themes. Houses? Check. Made in the Victorian era. Creepy twists on innocent children tales? Check. Sourced from the death of children and the seen not heard myth. Popular ghost stories, Christmas Carol was written in the Victorian era, inspired by the Victorian era. The Ouija boards originated in the Victorian era. Satanism, the occult, and mediums. Victorian era. Disney's Haunted Mansion literally says in the description that Anderson, the designer, was most influenced by a catalogue of Victorian decorative art and architecture that was part of the WED library. Victorian. Am I wrong? No. Alright, so this video was super long, but I hope you enjoyed it. It consists of 2 of my favorite things, so what do you expect? Here are all the sources I used. There's a lot. I got tired of writing this halfway through and honestly forgot most of the things I wanted to say, so thanks for watching. And before we get into some of the bloopers, I just really wanted to thank Roger Luckhurst, the professor that I used for first source, for not only being an amazing person and studying all these things that are really cool, but also, sending me some books. I'm really happy. So we've got, The Mummy's Curse and The Shining, The Strange Cases of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and King Solomon's Mines. I'm really excited for this summer reading material, and yeah, so I just wanted to say appreciation for that. He's a cool dude. Thank you. Bloopers. Ways of geeks and astrolot. Oh, well, I'm not doing that this time. I'm haunting a cult. Hi, we're recording a history video. You want to come be in the history video for 2 seconds? Are we gonna do it ASMR now? Crap. I really can't make a mustache. Oh my god. Just let me make a mustache.
Love you.
Press in 19. There's no 19 in this video. Inventions that I can't read.
Which is nearly 30. Which is nearly.
Shuffle, squeak.
According to Carol,
The chicken really caught me off guard. I forgot that I put chicken in there.
was accompanied. That's not even a word, buddy.
Professor Lodger Ruckhurst. I'm so sorry.
Historian Professor Lodger Ruckhurst. Every time, god damn, knew when the right time to take a family. Sorry, I just smacked the mic.
Oh my god.
I don't even think this is the one that's going to be filmed. I think these are all going to be bloopers. Like, I'm not even going to use any of this.